They logged the worlds as inert before the laughter faded. The Galactic Council's observation ring hung beyond the system's outer dust belt, its sensor petals unfurled with ceremonial precision. From this distance, the human-controlled bodies, resolved as planets and moons, their orbits tidy, their emissions dull. No radiant spires, no energy halos. Just mass, rotating slowly, obedient to gravity like anything else worth ignoring. The senior surveyor marked them as industrial class, at best, and passed the file upward with visible boredom. Council analysts filled the chamber with quiet derision. The inner world showed strip-mined scars and atmospheric processing towers, ugly but familiar. Another body carried heat blooms consistent with fusion plants, distributed evenly, inefficiently. A third was listed as a static artificial, too regular to be natural, too crude to be strategic. Someone suggested it was a failed habitat shell abandoned in place. The note was approved. Undeveloped infrastructure, the archivist summarized. They counted 9 major bodies and dismissed all 9. No maneuvering signatures, no mass displacement, no spike drives. The Council had fought war worlds before, shimmering, radiant constructs that announced themselves with gravitational noise and power flares. These did nothing. They sat in orbit, like obedient resources, their rotations stable to 6 decimal places. A junior observer noted that orbital corrections appeared pre-calculated centuries ahead. The remark was archived without comment. Static worlds. The phrase propagated through the assessment net, becoming shorthand for irrelevance. Council doctrine favored threats that moved, that signaled, that demanded attention. Stillness was safety. Stillness was submission. The fleet behind the observation ring, 12,000 vessels layered in disciplined arcs, held position while compliance models ran. Projected resistance was negligible. Estimated time to jurisdiction, under 6 hours. Expected casualties, minimal, almost embarrassing. A cultural attaché joked that humanity must worship gravity, given how devoted they were to staying inside. Laughter followed, brief and contained. The Council prided itself on restraint even in mockery. Long-range scans probed deeper. Beneath the planetary crusts, mass readings grew strange. Densities exceeded geological norms. Internal voids appeared where there should have been mantle. One analyst flagged the anomaly and suggested a recalibration. The recalibration returned the same result. The anomaly was reclassified as sensor error due to industrial interference and buried beneath cleaner data. At 4.3 astronomical units, a Council scout pinged the outermost body with an active sweep. The return was smooth, almost polite, no counterscan. No response, just reflected signal, damped and even. The scout logged compliance by default, harmless. The word joined the others, stacking into certainty. The Council had seen civilizations like this before, busy, heavy, proud of construction but ignorant of war. They built big because they did not know better. They stayed still because they could not do otherwise. The Empire's task was not conquest, but correction. As preparations moved forward, the observation ring adjusted orientation by a fraction of a degree, aligning its primary lens on the largest static world. Its night side showed no city glow, only a lacework of faint points, evenly spaced, too uniform to be organic. The archivist frowned at the pattern, then dismissed it as grid inefficiency. No one noticed the timing markers embedded in the rotation data. No one asked why the worlds shared a synchronized precession cycle measured in seconds, not years. The Council finalized its report. Humanity was catalogued, filed, and scheduled. The planets continued to turn, patient and silent, waiting to be mistaken for the last time. The Council announced itself as if the matter were already settled. A layered transmission unfolded across human channels, translated into 47 languages, each version identical in structure and assumption. Jurisdiction declared, inspection authorized, tribute schedules attached, compliance windows rendered, in clean numerals, 90 minutes to acknowledge, 6 hours to submit registries, 24 to receive oversight detachments. The tone was patient, rehearsed, accustomed to inevitability. The human response arrived in 12 seconds. The image was unadorned. A single human officer stood in a control space, built for utility, not display. No banners, no insignia beyond a small emblem at the collar. The background hummed with restrained power, deep and constant. The officer did not salute. They did not smile. "We acknowledge receipt," the officer said. "We decline jurisdiction." The words propagated through council systems, passed and repassed. Decline was not a recognized option. The senior envoy corrected the channel, assuming translation error, and restated the mandate with added emphasis on consequences. Human industrial capacity was cited as impressive but irrelevant. 9 static worlds did not constitute a defense. Tribute, the envoy explained, was the price of stability. "We decline inspection," the human officer replied evenly. "We decline tribute. We decline oversight." Declined. The word appeared as a flag in council analytics, tagged for anomaly. The envoy's patience thinned. They referenced precedent: 2,143 compliant systems, 601 peacefully integrated species. Resistance, history showed, was temporary. The human officer listened without interruption, hands still folded, posture unchanged. "You have misclassified us," the officer said when the envoy finished. "Those worlds are not infrastructure, they are vessels." A pause followed, long enough to register as discomfort. The envoy dismissed the claim with practiced ease. Vessels maneuvered, vessels signaled. Vessels did not sit in gravity wells like ornaments. The council requested inspection rights again, this time with armed escort authorization appended. "No," the human said. The simplicity cut deeper than threat. Council commanders brought up comparative displays: 12,000 council ships in system range versus 0 detectable human fleets beyond orbital bodies. Probability models refreshed, still favorable. The envoy leaned forward. "You are advised to reconsider," they said. "Non-compliance will be addressed." The human officer inclined their head slightly, acknowledging information rather than authority. "Addressing requires access," they said. "You will not receive it." A timer appeared on the council side, unilaterally imposed. 300 seconds to final response. The human officer did not look at it. Instead, they spoke with measured clarity. "This is the boundary. Do not cross it. Withdraw beyond 1.5 astronomical units. Power down active scanners. We will not pursue. We decline." The phrase echoed again, clipped and final. Council doctrine demanded escalation. Legal frameworks converted to operational directives. Inspection escorts spun up drives. Active scans intensified, probing planetary crusts with increasing aggression. The human officer watched the data scroll and made no move to interrupt. At 60 seconds remaining, the envoy attempted one last appeal, framing compliance as mercy. The human officer answered, without changing tone. "Mercy is offered after force," they said. "You have not earned either." The channel closed from the human side. Council commanders stared at the silent frame, then at the unmoving worlds, still catalogued as harmless, still rotating with obedient precision. Orders to advance queued across the fleet, confident and automatic. Humanity had declined jurisdiction. The Council prepared to enforce it. The Council chose a world that could not possibly run. Target designation locked onto the outermost human body, mass indexed at 6.1 Earth equivalents, orbit stable at 4.3 astronomical units. Its surface showed industrial scarring and nothing else. No shields, no emission spikes, no maneuvering intent. Council Fire Control tagged it as a demonstration target. Overwhelming enough to compel compliance, restrained enough to preserve assets for later processing. The order propagated across 12 capital ships. Energy lances fired in sequence, not volley. Discipline mattered. The beams crossed vacuum and struck the planet ship's dayside in converging arcs, power tuned to crack crust and mantle alike. Council observers expected the familiar progression: atmospheric bloom, tectonic shock, panic, signals. Sensors drank in the impact. The planet did not react. Light crawled across the surface and vanished into the crust as if swallowed. Thermal readings spiked locally, then flattened. Seismic sensors registered vibration for 1.6 seconds before returning to baseline. No ejector plume followed, no fractures propagated. The world continued its rotation, unchanged to 6 decimal places. No surface breach. A second strike followed. Power increased to 40%. This time the beams targeted a concentrated point, drilling intent into the crust. Council models predicted mantle exposure within 8 seconds. Instead, internal Oisbook density maps shifted. Layers beneath the surface reconfigured, mass redistributing with mechanical precision. The energy diffused laterally, bled away through internal channels too uniform to be natural. Absorption metrics populated the display. 91.3%. Then 92.0, then stabilized at 93.1%. The council escalated again. 3 battleships joined the fire, output climbing to 65%. Harmonics staggered to induce resonance failure. The planet's night side lit briefly as subsurface systems activated, not as shields, but as sinks. Heat was carried inward, stored, routed, and vented through apertures that only now became visible. Thin lines along tectonic boundaries that glowed and dimmed in measured cycles. The world is bleeding heat. The phrase appeared in an analyst's note, flagged and archived. Council weapons began to strain, emitters overheated. One battleship throttled down to avoid containment loss. The planet ship's response remained unchanged. Its rotation did. Not speed or slow. Gravitational readings held steady. Internal voids shifted again, countering stress before it could accumulate. A junior council engineer whispered the unthinkable. "It's armored," the term spread. Not shielded. Armored. A final demonstration strike was authorized at 80%, a level reserved for fleet engagements, not infrastructure. The beam struck and held. For 4.2 seconds, the planet's surface glowed like a wounded star. Then the glow faded. Absorption climbed to 94.6% before settling back to 93.9% as systems equalized. Damage assessment returned a single line. Structural integrity, nominal. The human response arrived unencrypted, riding the same channels the Council had used to declare jurisdiction. A data packet unfolded, graphs, curves, and a plain annotation stamped with time and scale. Impact. Absorbed, it read. Efficiency acceptable. The Council chamber fell silent. For the first time, the observers noticed what had been hidden in plain sight. The planet's mass distribution was not geological. It was engineered. Layered plates, kilometers thick, interlocked beneath the crust, separated by voids tuned for energy dissipation. What the Council had fired on was not a world. It was a hull. The planet completed another fraction of its orbit, patient and intact. Across the system, other human worlds adjusted nothing. They did not maneuver, they did not signal. They simply continued to exist, indifferent to the fire that had failed to move even one of them. Council fire control officers stared at their displays, at absorption rates that refused to drop below 93%, and realized the demonstration had taught the wrong lesson. They had not shown humanity the cost of defiance. They had shown it that the Council's strongest weapons could strike a world and do almost nothing at all. The change registered first as a rounding error. Orbital. Telemetry for the struck world, updated by a fraction of a percent. A deviation small enough to be smoothed out by predictive filters. Council analysts corrected the model and moved on. Then the correction failed. The deviation persisted, clean and directional, as if gravity itself had accepted a new instruction. The planet was accelerating, not with flare or thrust plume, but with mass redistribution so precise it mimicked inevitability. Internal densities shifted, void networks realigned. The world's orbital path bent inward by 0.02 degrees, then another 0.03, compounding smoothly. The acceleration curve climbed past 0.4 g and did not spike. It leveled. Hell.tt moved. Council doctrine did not account for planets that altered course on command. Maneuvering orders rippled through the fleet as captains attempted to maintain formation integrity. The effort failed immediately. A body with 6 Earth masses changing vector rewrote local gravity, tugging hulls and distorting navigation solutions. Ships compensated, then overcompensated, their elegant arcs warping into uneven spirals. The First World was not alone. 7 additional human bodies adjusted simultaneously, each altering orbit by carefully staggered intervals. The timing was exact, delays measured in seconds, not minutes, ensuring their gravitational fields overlapped just enough to create corridors of force. Council ships found themselves drifting sideways relative to intended vectors, pulled into converging lanes they had not planned to occupy. Distance between formations collapsed from thousands of kilometers to hundreds. Closing by mass. Council commanders ordered evasive burns, drives flared. Some ships escaped the pull, others did not. A cruiser attempting a high-G correction found its maneuver amplified by the shifting gravity, well of a second world, and overshot, slamming into an Allied destroyer at relative velocity that shredded both hulls. The collision was logged as an accident. No human weapons fired. At 1.2 million kilometers, the primary war world altered rotation rate, shaving milliseconds off its day. The effect propagated outward as a subtle wave in space-time geometry, just enough to destabilize synchronized council formations that relied on shared timing. Fire control solutions desynced, targeting windows slipped, missed shots multiplied. The humans had not accelerated to chase. They had accelerated to arrange. Council fleets were forced into compressed volumes where their own mass became a liability. Capital ships blocked one another's firing arcs. Smaller escorts jostled for space and found none. The gravitational lanes funneled them inward, toward positions that maximized human advantage without a single hostile emission. A council strategist realized the pattern too late. "They're not collapsing us with force," they said. "They're collapsing us with timing." The largest human world adjusted again, this time shedding velocity with equal smoothness. The deceleration rippled outward, snapping several council ships out of alignment mid-burn. Structural stresses spiked. 1. Carrier lost a dorsal section as inertial compensators failed to keep up. Human sensors logged the breakup and marked the debris field as hazardous to navigation. No fire required. The phrase appeared briefly on a human auxiliary channel, not broadcast, but captured by coalition observers watching in disbelief. As the Council struggled to re-establish spacing, the planets settled into new orbits that were anything but stable from an enemy perspective. They formed a loose ring, each world's gravity overlapping the next, a moving wall that denied retreat and compressed advance. The Council fleet found itself inside a system that no longer behaved like one. Human communication remained minimal. No taunts, no demands. Just a single update transmitted on an open band, its tone informational rather than threatening. "Orbital adjustments complete," it said. The planets held their new paths, massive and patient, having crossed an unspoken threshold. The Council had believed worlds were anchors, things that pinned civilizations in place. Humanity had turned them into weapons of position. The first shot did not come from a planet. It came from the shadow between them. As Council formations struggled against rewritten gravity, human fire control finalized solutions that had been converging since the first orbital shift. Command assets were flagged in descending priority: flagships, coordination nodes, fleet relays. The list was short. The math was clean. Railgun fire answered first. From the night side of a human world, a kilometer-long accelerator spine opened along a tectonic seam and hurled mass outward. Amongst slugs, each weighing 40 tons, left the rails at relativistic fractions. Their trajectories bent deliberately by the gravity wells now dominating the system. They did not fly straight, they fell. The first Council flagship never registered in launch. Its shields flared a heartbeat too late as 3 slugs arrived on slightly different vectors, timed 0.18 seconds apart. One punched through the bow and exited through the command core. Another shattered the engine lattice. The third arrived after structural integrity had already failed, tearing the ship into asymmetric halves that spun away silently. 1. Missiles. Followed, released from smaller human bodies previously catalogued as moons. They launched in packets of 9, each missile carrying minimal yield and maximal guidance logic. Some burned hot, inviting interception. Others coasted cold, invisible, against debris and planetary glare. Council point defenses engaged the obvious threats and congratulated themselves as intercept counts rose. The unseen missiles curved in on gravity-assisted arcs and struck from below firing planes no doctrine covered. At 2.8 million kilometers, a second Council command ship attempted to realign, its captain ordering full thrust to escape the collapsing lanes. The maneuver carried it directly into a gravity corridor shaped moments earlier by a human world's deceleration. The ship's vector bent inward, its own acceleration amplified the fall. A railgun round met it halfway. 2. The impact did not explode the ship, it cored it. Power died instantly, life support followed. The hull remained mostly intact as it tumbled, dead and drifting, preserved for boarding that would never come. We count first, the line appeared as a brief annotation on a human tactical feed, captured and retransmitted by coalition observers. The Council tried to respond with volume. Energy batteries fired into HFY, the massed gravity lanes, beams refracting unpredictably as spacetime itself refused to cooperate. Shots missed or struck allies. Command cohesion fractured as relays vanished one by one. Human targeting ignored the chaos and continued its ledger. Missiles struck a third flagship at standoff distance, nuclear charges shaped and directional. The detonation crushed sensor arrays and cracked armor without vaporizing the hull. The ship went dark, systems dead but structure intact. Human fire ceased immediately, boarding markers lit and then held. 3. Gravity finished what weapons began. A Council carrier, its engines damaged by earlier near misses, drifted into the overlapping pull of 2 human worlds. The forces tore at it unevenly. Internal frames buckled. Docked escorts sheared free and collided. No human weapon touched it. The carrier broke apart over 9 minutes. Its destruction logged as environmental neutralization. Human losses remained unchanged. Ammunition tallies updated in disciplined columns. Railgun rounds expended 27. Confirmed command kills 3. Disabled. Assets 1. Missile expenditure 84. Intercept losses acceptable. Nuclear charges used 1. Council resistance collapsed in layers. Ships without orders hesitated. Hesitation became surrender as captains watched flagships vanish with surgical inevitability. Transponders lit across the display, surrender codes flooding every frequency. Human systems acknowledged them automatically, retargeting missiles mid-flight. Railgun capacitors dumping charge harmlessly into sinks. Do not fire on green. The directive held even when green-marked ships drifted into optimal firing solutions. Against still hostile targets, human gunners adjusted, letting a few seconds stretch longer than efficiency demanded. No one argued. At 49 minutes, no Council command asset remained operational. The fleet still existed, thousands of hulls adrift, damaged, frightened, but it no longer functioned as a force. The planets held their positions, gravity lanes stable, the system locked into a configuration that denied regrouping. Human command transmitted a single status line, unencrypted. Primary accounting complete. The guns fell silent. Not because there were no targets left, but because the ledger had closed. The firing stopped because it was ordered to stop. Human weapons fell silent across the system in the same second. Capacitors dumping charge, missile, embays sealing, gravity lanes holding steady without further adjustment. Council ships waited for the next calculation and received a transmission instead. It propagated outward on every band, unencrypted, indifferent to protocol, riding civilian. Relays until it reached systems far beyond the battle. The image was plain. A human legal officer this time, not a commander, framed by data rather than steel. Their voice carried without emphasis. This engagement is paused, they said. This is a lawful broadcast. Imperial crews braced for annihilation clauses. None came. First, the officer said, the ownership, processing, or trade of sentient beings is prohibited. Effective immediately. Manifests unfolded beside the image. Cargo holds flagged in red across hundreds of hulls. Numbers followed, precise and damning. Estimated enslaved populations identified 6.0 million. Vessels implicated 417. Installations pending seizure 23. Slavery ends here. The phrase appeared once, stark and unadorned. Second, the officer continued, surrender is protected. The conditions were listed without ornament. Power down. Offensive systems transmit standard distress and surrender codes. Hold position. Ships meeting these conditions will not be fired upon. Crews will receive medical care. Prisoners will not be harmed. We do not kill prisoners. The words echoed through council channels, reinforced by action, as human targeting systems immediately excluded green-marked hulls from every solution. Missiles peeled away mid-course. Gravity lanes relaxed just enough to stabilize drifting ships. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word landed heavier than any impact. Rank does not confer immunity. Command authority does not negate responsibility. Evidence has been collected. Jurisdiction is asserted. A council jurist attempted interruption, invoking sovereignty and ancient accords. The officer did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, they said. Accords that permit it are void. Timelines populated beneath the image. Detention facilities deploying, 14. Judicial panels convening, 6. Initial hearings scheduled within 96 hours. The scale was unmistakable. This was not rhetoric. It was administration. Human ships began to move again, but not to attack. Boarding. Craft launched in controlled numbers. Medics visible through viewports. Weapons safetied. Damage control drones swarmed crippled council hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human moon adjusted its gravity output by a fractional margin to prevent 2 surrendered cruisers from colliding. No reprisals. The directive pulsed quietly through human channels and manifested everywhere at once. Insults shouted in panic went unanswered. Pleas went unacknowledged but recorded. Resistance was met with containment, not punishment. The legal officer concluded without flourish. You mistook restraint for weakness, they said. This is restraint. The transmission ended. Across the system, council crews realized the battle had not paused because humanity was finished, but because it had decided the killing no longer served the law it intended to enforce. And that realization, spreading faster than fear ever had, changed the shape of the surrender that followed. The confirmation came from outside the battlefield. Coalition observers, long relegated to passive roles by council dominance, began comparing. Notes the moment the law broadcast ended. Their sensors had been watching the same worlds, but with different questions in mind. Not how to break them. How they had arrived. The timelines did not align with panic construction. A coalition astrodynamicist overlaid orbital data from the engagement with archival star charts reaching back 4 centuries. The match was not approximate. It was exact. The human worlds occupied positions that had been calculated long before the Council fleet entered the system. Their gravitational influence mapped against likely invasion vectors with unnerving precision. These were not emergency fortifications. They were placements. They didn't build for this battle, the analyst said quietly. They built for the idea of it. Coalition deep scans pushed past the surface readings the Council had dismissed. Beneath kilometers of crust, structural lattices revealed manufacturing seams older than the Coalition itself. Isotope dating returned numbers that forced recalibration twice before acceptance. Initial construction phases began 300 years ago. Some subsystems were older still, refitted rather than replaced, layered like history itself. Built long before. HFY, phrase circulated through coalition channels, stripped of drama by the weight of evidence. Humanity's planet ships were not reactive monuments. They were the end state of a doctrine that assumed attention would come eventually. The only uncertainty had been who would arrive first. Logistics told the rest of the story. Resource flows, traced back to quiet mining operations in systems never claimed, never fortified, never interesting enough to provoke scrutiny. Mass disappeared from asteroid belts and reappeared as internal reinforcement plates kilometers thick. Heat signatures were diffused, masked as industrial waste. Nothing about the buildup had looked like war because it wasn't meant to be seen as one. Coalition military theorists revisited old human exchanges, academic papers once dismissed as speculative. Kinetic supremacy, mass as defense, gravity as a maneuver space. The ideas had been public, the scale had not, they told us, a coalition envoy admitted. We just didn't believe they meant it literally. The positioning was the most damning revelation. The 9 planet ships were not clustered defensively. They were arranged to deny approach, retreat, and reinforcement across 6 adjacent corridors. Any fleet entering human space would be forced into predictable volumes, its options narrowed before the first shot. The Council had not stumbled into a trap. It had followed the only path available. Political models updated in real time. Coalition. States recalculated risk, not in terms of opposing humanity, but of being unprepared when humanity enforced its law elsewhere. Quiet messages began to move. Requests for observation rights, legal harmonization, shared protocols. Alignment followed readiness. In the wreckage of Council Command, survivors struggled to reconcile defeat with the absence of improvisation. This had not been a gamble. It had been an appointment kept. For the Coalition, the conclusion was unavoidable. Humanity had not hidden its strength out of fear or isolation. It had hidden it to avoid premature use. The planet ships held their orbits patient and immovable, as they had for centuries. The galaxy was only now catching up to the moment they were built for. Neutralization resumed without spectacle. Human. Command did not announce a second phase, it simply adjusted priorities. Remaining Council vessels were sorted into 3 categories: hostile, surrendered, undecided, and gravity did the rest. The planet ships altered their orbits by margins small enough to look harmless and large enough to be decisive. Corridors tightened. Escape vectors vanished. The first surrender cascade began at the edge. A Council destroyer, its command net gone, and its engines strained by overlapping gravity wells, powered down and broadcast surrender codes on every band. Human systems acknowledged in milliseconds. The ship's status flipped green. Gravity eased around it just enough to stabilize its tumble. Nearby captains noticed. Within 30 seconds, 5 more followed. Surrender works. The phrase appeared on a coalition monitor as an annotation, not propaganda, flagged as observable behavior. Not all chose quickly. A cluster of Council cruisers attempted to break outward, firing engines to full and dumping reactor reserves into brute thrust. The maneuver carried them straight into a gravity lane, shaped moments earlier by 2 converging worlds. Their acceleration amplified the pull. Hull frames screamed. One cruiser shed armor plates like leaves. Another lost thrust and yawed broadside into its escort. The collision shattered both ships. No human weapons fired. Human moons, previously dismissed as inert satellites, began to move. Not far. Not fast. They slid into positions that denied micro-jump calculations and fouled emergency burns. Their mass was enough. Their timing was exact. Council captains found every option narrowed to a choice between surrender and collision. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed quietly through human channels and held even as green-marked ships drifted across optimal firing lines against still hostile targets. Human gunners adjusted, letting windows pass. Efficiency dipped by measurable percentages. No one objected. Missiles launched again, but sparingly now. They targeted only ships still broadcasting active fire control signals. Warheads detonated at standoff distances, crushing sensors and propulsion without tearing hulls apart. Each strike was followed by a pause, a chance offered without words. Many took it. Boarding operations followed gravity's work. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at controlled, relative velocities, grappling with mechanical certainty. Teams moved methodically, 2 security, 2 medics, sealing compartments, venting where resistance persisted, waiting where it did not. There were no shouted orders, no celebratory chatter. The work resembled disaster response more than assault. 22 minutes, surrendered ships outnumbered hostile ones 4-1. At 31, 7-1. The cascade fed on itself as crews watched neighbors survive compliance, exactly as promised. Panic burned out and was replaced by calculation. A council carrier made the last organized attempt at resistance, launching strike. Craft in a massed wave meant to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was precise and restrained. Point defense grids did not annihilate the fighters, they shaped them. Electromagnetic pulses fried guidance systems, herding craft into narrow cones where pilots could eject or coast powerless. Recovery. Beacons activated automatically. Human ships altered course to avoid debris that might endanger surrendering hulls. No unnecessary killing. The phrase appeared once on a human auxiliary channel, captured and retransmitted by observers who did not yet understand how heavy it was. Gravity continued to do the rest. The planet's ships adjusted again, shedding velocity in synchronized steps that snapped remaining hostile vessels out of alignment mid-burn. Inertial compensators failed. Internal injuries spiked. Engines flamed out. One by one, red markers blinked to green. At 58 minutes, only a handful of council ships remained active, isolated and drifting between worlds that no longer behaved like celestial bodies. Human Command issued a final advisory, informational rather than threatening. "You are contained," it said. "Power down and live." They complied. Silence followed, not abrupt, but settling, as if the system itself exhaled. Hundreds of council. Hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, deploying repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions. Gravity lanes relaxed to stable configurations that favored safety over control. Boarding tallies stabilized. Prisoners secured. 5.9 million jars injured, treated, 612,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human moon adjust its position by a fraction of a degree, to shield their hull from debris, and felt the last illusion fall away. This was not conquest. It was dismantling. Human Command logged the phase complete and shifted priorities to humanitarian transfer and legal processing. The planet ships held their positions, massive and patient, having proven that mass, when timed correctly, could end a war without chasing anyone at all. Order followed violence with deliberate speed. Human boarding schedules ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured council crew were triaged without comment, their species tags flashing briefly before dissolving into the same priority queue. Pain was managed. Bleeding stopped. The process moved with practiced calm, as if rehearsed long before it was, required no reprisals. The directive propagated with the same authority as a firing order. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and handed over without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal system already awake and waiting. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated, down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in neutral tones, stripped of accusation. Prisoner counts stabilized at 5.9 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like promises. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived along vectors cleared, hours earlier, bearing markings of worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the pattern. Neighboring systems were not waiting for invitations. They were filing requests. One by one, declarations arrived through diplomatic channels. Suspension of council tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the statutes broadcast during the pause in fighting. Political, gravity shifted not with speeches, but with paperwork. We choose this law. The line appeared repeatedly, identical phrasing traced to a public template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption, driven by observed outcomes rather than ideology. The humans did not comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity. Enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked to sensor logs, cargo records, and testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier, 212. Individuals, after updates, were separated and transferred under guard that did not tighten when they struggled and did not loosen when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. A council governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate alignment. The reply came from a legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. In the detention habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no one had been spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic. The lesson settled unevenly, but permanently. At 120 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stood aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The planet ships remained on station, scarred, crusts patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Command logs updated with the same tone used for maneuvering mass. Force applied, compliance achieved, order established. In distant systems, leaders weighed defiance against evidence moving through every relay. Green markers honored, surrender protected, trials inevitable. The choice was no longer abstract. Humanity had not taken territory. It had established a standard and shown, without hurry or cruelty, how that standard would be enforced. The system settled into a silence that felt earned. Debris fields stabilized into predictable arcs. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories, trial schedules propagated through secure channels with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if violence had been a brief interruption rather than a defining act. Human sensors did not relax. Deep-range arrays continued their sweep beyond the outermost orbits, baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 137 hours post-neutralization, one array returned a signal that failed initial classification. Not noise, not drift. A persistence that resisted subtraction. Analysts reran the data. The signature held. It originated beyond the dark between orbits, far past the last human world, at a distance measured in tens of thousands of astronomical units. Its approach vector ignored established corridors. Its mass estimate fluctuated, as if the object disagreed with being measured at all. Emission profiles matched fragments of forbidden research buried in pre-council archives. Records of systems erased so completely, their names survived only as warnings. Exterminator signature. The tag appeared once, then locked. Human command. Convened without alarms. No broadcasts interrupted relief operations. The information moved through compartments that had existed long before the council arrived. Planning cells with headers already written, contingencies already numbered, timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting. They were familiar. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocol, asked a single question over a secure link. Is this because of what you did here? The human reply came after a pause, measured in consideration, not doubt. No, they said. It was coming regardless. Meaning the council had never been the final problem. The planet ships adjusted, station by fractions of a degree, aligning long-range sensors toward the approaching anomaly. Around them, moons mirrored the motion without instruction, gravity settling into a configuration older than the Council's oldest charts. Ammunition tallies updated. Training rotations shifted. Messages went out to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Not the last war. Beyond the rim, something ancient moved closer, indifferent to law, mercy, or surrender. Humanity watched it approach with the same calm it had shown an empire and began doing the math again.